yoga, because we say yoga is the one thing where you lift your own body weight so that you, and you're not really going to a gym and lifting other forms of weight. So do you think yoga is covers all the dimensions that can improve the brain, or do we still need to consider other forms?
That's a tough one, and it really depends on the type of yoga. So whether you're doing hatha, ashtanga, or any of these other forms of kundalini, any way of these forms of yoga will probably trigger the brain in different ways because they work at different intensities.
Right.
One is faster, one is more intense, one is more powerful, the other one is slower and stuff like that. So I would probably, and on top of that, they've been practicing yoga and Ayurvedic medicine for the past 5,000 years, right? So clearly there's going to be some form of kind of holistic way that yoga can be prescribed for certain mental functions. And if you think about it, and I wrote this in my new book, right, The 5 Energies of Horrible Bosses, is that when we're looking at Ayurvedic medicine, yoga didn't exist, right, until kind of 200 years ago, when actually it was the British that didn't like the ideas of people from India practicing Ayurvedic medicine because they weren't part of the Western medical training. And so a lot of these Ayurvedic practitioners had to separate out and then create kind of this yoga idea of, because that was physical exercise and that was then tolerated. But if we look at Ayurvedic medicine, which is one of the oldest forms of medicine in the world, yoga was kind of like one of the medicines that was prescribed, one of the treatments that was prescribed together with other form of dietary and things and all of that kind of stuff. So it probably is one of the most holistic approaches. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did research on the various different forms of yoga, that they'd probably also be triggering different parts of the brain. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Marcel, there's an interesting statement which we all say quite often. We say we know it, but we don't do it. And also they say that the greatest gap in human advancement is this awareness and action gap, right? So when it comes to the awareness of the body and the brain, what have you observed to be motivators for people and leaders to take action? Like, for example, we know exercise is important, but we don't. That's the biggest trade out in the day when we have a busy day.
Yeah, no, that's a really good. And I actually I dedicated 3 chapters to that in my book, Headstrong Performance, and that all boils down to kind of the integrated model of change, right? So it's of course known as the trans-theoretical model of change. Is really our understanding that we go through psychologically, we go through these different stages of readiness until we're actually able to take action. And when I was studying the trans-theoretical model of change, I also came to understanding that there were actually a couple of other models as well. So I integrated all of those together to create an integrated model of change. And basically what it comes down to is that we're all in a different state of readiness. And so, if I'm not thinking at all about exercise, I'm in the state, what we call pre-contemplation. So I'm just, I'm not even thinking about it. And there are a lot of people in this planet in a state of pre-contemplation where it comes down to that body and that mind awareness. The next stage up is when we do become aware, right? Then we start contemplating, we start thinking about it. And that's the second stage. The third stage then is when we start thinking about doing something, right? We start creating a plan for ourselves. We kind of, preparing ourselves for, hey, maybe I do need to start doing. So maybe I'll do something 1st of January, right? Kind of like one of those things, but we start thinking about doing that. And then the final one is then the action that we then end up taking. And because that's then with that point when we might be ready, and we have to go through those phases. And then of course there's one that comes after that, which is a maintenance and a relapse phase. That because every now and then we fall off the wagon and then we relapse and we have to go, we go back a few steps. And so to me, and I think that's one thing that I learned as a coach is we very often have an expectation that everybody is in the state of readiness and action, but in reality, so many people aren't. And I've just learned to respect where a person is on their stages of change. And if they wanted to move from one stage to another, that's great. There are great coaching techniques for that. But if they're not ready, they're not ready, and that's okay too.
Correct, correct, correct. That's a beautiful way of putting it, because that readiness is often assumed, and especially,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely, and especially because I come from the fitness industry originally, right? So 30 years ago, I was a personal trainer, and in the fitness industry, it's a very prescriptive way of coaching, and where it's kind of an expectation that you're supposed to apply yourself in a certain way. And over the past 10 or 11 years, I have another company that actually certifies and trains personal trainers in the understanding of how to coach people through behavior change, and that's always been a very difficult thing for personal trainers to understand, is that they can't tell people what to do, because people have a tendency not to apply themselves, and it's those trainers out there who do understand that behavior change and work with the client in that space where they have the tendency to have the greatest success as well.
wonderful, wonderful, interesting, Marcel. I heard in one of the forums that you were presenting, I heard you say that, well, or rather, you quipped. They're saying that the brain is connected to the feet and not to the butt. In the virtual world, how should
Yep.
leaders counterbalance the ills of sitting for such long hours?
That's great. And if you noticed, of course, if you're listening to the podcast, you won't. But I'm actually standing right now
Correct.
in
I can
the
see that. I can see that.
because yeah. And so that in itself is one of the most important things. And the reason is because a lot of the neurons that kind of are from our brain, what they call them axons. So like kind of these neural bundles, they travel all the way down the body through our spine, and they end up all the way at the bottoms in our feet. And so the brain is very much triggered by the soles of our feet. That's why things like reflexology and all of that kind of stuff is so powerful, because there are these direct connections between our feet and the brain. Unfortunately, we don't have those same connections in the buttocks. And so when we're sitting, we actually switch the brain off a little bit versus when we're standing. And that's been scientifically proven as well, is that the brain has a tendency to just kind of be more active and be more alert when we're on our feet rather than we're in a sitting position. So my advice would be sit less.
Correct.